Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another interview on the Art of Intervention Project Summit. Valerie and I have known each other for a couple of years through another kind of association we're a part of. And I'm excited to hear from Valerie Mason-John. She has a lot of perspective to bring us from a global perspective. And just thanks for taking some time to connect as we talk about kind of like sobriety during this time of like two real global pandemics going on. So thanks for joining us today, Valerie.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, how do we stay sober and abstinent during this time? You know, when the first pandemic came around, yeah, people were just completely freaked out. And the only thing many people could do was, if you were fortunate enough, was to be able to go and buy alcohol. Because if you lived in South Africa, forget it. They didn't even consider alcohol to be an essential service. You know, and on one level, it is really great that certain countries did see alcohol as an essential service, because we know that detoxing from alcohol can be the most fatal detoxing that can happen. But I do know a friend of mine who's in the UK wrote to me and said, I was out walking and I bumped into a friend who runs a winery, and, you know, and said to him, you know, how's your business? And he said, well, he said, I've got no business from restaurants or, you know, bars, but he said, my income has gone up by 75%. He said that the amount of drinking from domestic drinking, people buying alcohol for themselves, has just skyrocketed through the roof. And then we also know that actually during this time of of this first pandemic, with all borders closing down, it was hard to get clean drugs through. And I know, you know, one of my colleagues, she lost 4 students overnight. They thought, oh, well, we can't do anything. Let's have a smack party. And it was laced with fentanyl and they
Mm,
were dead, you
mm.
know. So we definitely know that addiction has been a real big thing, because people haven't been able to go to meetings. You know, people who were dependent on the 12-step meeting or the Buddhist recovery meeting, they all closed down. People didn't want to have to go online. So it's been a real issue. And then with the second pandemic, you know, the second pandemic of racial justice, of social justice, which has been lurking around for years, it's the trauma, you know, in terms of just, I don't know whether you watched that video of George Floyd, but I'm so grateful that I have practice, because I was so activated. I mean, my whole body went into a physical crisis for at least 2 or 3 days. But because I had practice, it was like, okay, I'm not going to pick up, you know, alcohol or drugs, but I had to be really aware of not turning to food to soothe myself. And this is, as we see, like, people have been so thrown out of the nest that if they're not going to be using drugs or alcohol, they're going to be turning to the anger and the frustration. So really, really, this has been a very particular time in history for all of us in many different ways.
Yeah, it's definitely something we've obviously never seen before and hopefully we'll never see again. But in that, it can shake up anybody. And that's the one thing I love about you, Valerie, is because you really help people get centered no matter what crisis is going on in our life that can throw us off, right? And with all that you do, I want people to kind of hear some programs you have in place, because one of your offerings we talked about do is, like, you know, kind of breaking free from anger is one of the courses that people get to download as your free gift from this. But talking about your mindfulness based addiction recovery and your 8-step process, and let people know how you help people get through this kind of stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, for mentioning that. I can remember when this first pandemic came around, and I thought, what can I do? How can I be of service? And I just thought, yeah, let me make this course working with anger, hatred, and fear free, you know, because we know that there was so much anger around uncertainty, people taking away our civil liberties, the government taking away our freedom, you know, basically people arguing with reality. It's one of the things I help people is you're arguing with reality. Everything is uncertain. It never has been certain.
Yeah.
You know, wake up, it's always been uncertain. We've just assumed it's been certain. You know, whenever I travel, it's like all plans are provisional. You
Mm.
know, plans are provisional. And then in terms of the programs that you speak about, the first one that I co-developed with Dr. Paramavandu Groves, who was a specialist in alcoholism, a psychiatrist working for the National Health Service and specialized in alcoholism and drug addiction. And my publisher asked me if I had another book to write, and I don't know where it came from, but it was like, okay, 8-step recovery. I think I wanted to share my recovery because I got my recovery in the rooms of meditation. That's where I got my recovery, Rob. And people always said, what was it? What was it? What was it that you pulled through? And definitely it was the mindfulness teachings, the Buddhist teachings. Well, mindfulness comes from Buddhism. And so we co-wrote this book, 8-Step Recovery. And then people said, where are the meetings? We were like, didn't really write the book to have meetings. So, you know, the finger was pointed at me because I was the one who was in recovery. So it's like, okay. So my partner, who is a big book thumper, she's a big book thumper, really, and so I had been to 12-step meetings and really used their format, but put on that format a Buddhist lens
Mm.
and created these meetings. So this is another offering. Just as there's 12 steps out there, there's smart recovery out there, there's refuge recovery, recovery dharma. 8-step recovery is another offering, another free offering. And don't you think it's fantastic? Because once upon a time, it was just 12 steps or the asylum, you know, and if that didn't, you know, if that size shoe didn't fit you, what were you going to do? You know, you were doomed. And so now, you know, we've got this smart recovery, we've got this Buddhist recovery. So it's just fantastic. So as I say, we have 8-step meetings in several continents, and they're peer-led. They're peer-led. People don't even know that it's me behind it. And that's great. You know, it's principles before personalities. And it's really great having my partner who comes from that 12-step approach to just keep me in line around those kind of things. So there's the book, there are the meetings, and then one of the other things that I offer, which is a paying course, but really cheap, really. People always say it's so cheap, but for me, I wanted it like that. It's not about, it's about how do we make it accessible? So we have, you know, mindfulness-based relapse prevention. And at some point, people would just say, why is that so negative? Mindfulness-based relapse prevention. Why is there this emphasis on relapse? And it got me thinking, because I thought I was a chronic relapser. You know, my core addiction was food. I was a chronic bulimic, which would mean overeating and throwing up. Simply, that's what it would mean. And I would relapse into binging and throwing up, binging and throwing up. So I was a chronic relapser. And actually, it was like, could I really prevent relapse, actually? And if we're talking about preventing relapse, are we saying that's a bad thing? Because actually, for many people, it's part of their recovery. And what I had to learn was, what was I going to do when I relapsed? What was I going to do when I picked up? Because what I was doing when I did relapse, when I did pick up, was beat myself up, kick myself down and put myself in a gutter, which then just kept me in that vicious cycle of addiction. And so I wanted something that we could focus more on the positive, and so develop this program, Mindfulness Based Addiction Recovery. So in a way, it's a cousin to mindfulness-based relapse prevention. It's in that you know, in that lineage of mindfulness programs that Jon Kabat-Zinn popularized, mainstreamed. Jon, as he would say, did not invent mindfulness. That's what's on, you know, out there. But he was the one who mainstreamed mindfulness and actually got it into the hospitals, got it out there in the world. So mindfulness-based addiction recovery is part of that school of mindfulness programs. And what's different is it's interactive. It isn't just like sit down, tell us about your issues. It's interactive. Even online, it's still really interactive. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. From the individual perspective, because when you sit there and talk about like bulimia and food, I mean, you have to eat in your life. So you had to learn how to have a healthy relationship with food. What was that process like for you? Because we don't actually haven't had a lot of people on the Art of Intervention Project Summit talking about kind of food addictions and struggles around that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
That's a great question, because as we know, people who are alcoholics, they have to drink. Okay.
Yeah.
But the one drink that is lethal for them is the alcohol. So in a way, how did I get my recovery from food? Oh God, I'll be honest, it was a real difficult, tough journey. Firstly, it was a real difficult, tough journey because I had a lot of trauma in my life. And when I work with people now, I work as a compassionate inquiry practitioner stroke therapist. And I say to people, like, if you've had a lot of trauma, you're not going to get over it in 1 year, 2 year. It takes time, you know. So, it's not like, okay, I come to therapy and I'm going to be done in 1 year, 2 year. It takes a lot of time. So it was a long, tough journey. And as I said, I was a chronic relapser. And so what happened was that would I call myself an alcoholic? No, I suppose I drank alcoholically. So I realized that I had to let go of alcohol, because when I was drinking alcohol, I would want food because there was sugar in it. So I would be doing all this work, but then I would drink alcohol, and then I would be out of control with food. So in answer to your question, one of the main, I'd say there's a couple of main things working with eating disorders. Okay, we have to work with why the bulimia, why? But if we're working with the why, there are a couple of practical things we do have to work with, because I worked with a lot of the why and I still wasn't getting better. And what got me, yes, I did all that psychological work. I can remember getting to a point where I don't need this anymore, but I don't know how to stop. I had to identify what were my alcohols. Yeah. So sugar. So I'm abstinent from sugar in foods. And in fact, I bought a couple of days ago, I saw this juice, it was blueberry. I thought, oh, freshly squeezed juice, because I can do fruit. I had this drink. It was like I had been beaten up from head to toe in my body. The next day when I woke up and I looked at the jar that I bought the juice in, the bottle, and it was like 29% sugar. No wonder, like my
Oh,
whole
wow.
body, oh God, it went into crisis. So I have sugar. I don't have sugar, because if I have sugar in my diet, I can't stop. I'm one of these people, if I have sugar, I can't stop. And then and if I can't stop, I'm not going to feel comfortable with all the food I eat. And so I'm going to have my head down the toilet, because that's how I would deal with overeating. So one has to begin to identify what are their alcohols. Is it sugar? Is it salt? Is it white flours? What are your red light foods? What are your amber light foods, and what are your green light foods, the ones that are okay? And I have to be aware, like chips, which is crisp in English, chips over here. I would say it's an amber food. So it's not like, oh, this is really dangerous, but I have to be aware of it, because I know if I started eating those every day, I could put myself at risk of binging and having my head down the toilet. And I don't want to have my head out down the toilet, because that's a hell realm, living in that realm.
Mm.
Another thing that I want to say about bulimia is that what lots of people don't actually realize is that actually those of us who are bulimic get very high on binging. I think it might be because there's so much in us, there's this restriction of airflow. And I can remember it's like, it seems a long time ago now, but I can remember I'm doing like this, that my whole balance would be off. And it was like I was in a completely another world. completely another world. Nothing else cared. I was just in this world and in this thing of eating and in this world. And then when you throw up, again, you have this other high.
Mm.
Of course, the more times you throw up, you don't have the same high as, as the first highs that you've had. So that's another reason why we're addicted to it as well. But the other thing is kindness, self-compassion is the other thing that we need, which is why I think meditation was so important, because what meditation does is regulate the central nervous system. And that was the thing that helped me to slow down. That was the thing that helped me to get off that vicious cycle of addiction, of this practice of loving kindness and slowing down.
Yeah, that self-awareness is so huge. As you sit there and talk about, when I have alcohol, then it triggers sugar, which does this, which I throw up, and then I get high over that, in a sense, from the dopamine releases. And like, you look at gambling and sex and all these things, like there's a commonality between those, of like, oh, I am totally, and from the outside perspective, right? They can look and go, what is wrong with you? Why are you doing that? Like, we obviously don't understand. Step into my world for a little bit, which is why we want to educate people on that. So thank you for sharing that part of your story.
Pleasure. Those gateway drugs, the gateway might not be your main thing, but we know it's a gateway to your main thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I got sober, at my sponsor at the time, I got sober in the 12-step world, and in recovery, he's like, "What's one thing that makes you happy, Rob?" And I said, "Milkshakes," without hesitation, right? So my wife jokes now, 19 years later, when have not had a drop of alcohol or any type of marijuana or any sort of drug. It's like, I don't think you've ever become sober, because you still like sugar. That's one thing I had to work on. So we're going to put that on the shelf right here, and we're going to pick that up after we're done with the summit. So, but it is about the mind, right? It's about the mindset, and how do you handle and find that inner peace is so key. Is it different for the one suffering from an addiction or a disorder of sorts to the family? Like, how do we help the family in this situation that has a loved one that's struggling?
Well, I would say how we help the family is the whole family has to go into recovery. So we can't help the family needs to help itself. I mean, why in the family are there people with addictions? What went on in that family? So that's not saying that people were bad parents, but we know that there had to be some trauma. And I've often been in a situation where I've had people contact me, people come to me and say, my spouse is using, is drinking alcohol, won't stop, or my child, and won't stop taking drugs. And so, I ask about the history, and I say, well, do you smoke dope, or do you drink? And yeah, I have a couple of glasses of wine, but I'm not an alcoholic. And I say, well, I'm not saying you're alcoholic, but I'm just like, do you drink? Yeah, but I'm not an alcoholic. And then I say, well, the best thing that you could do would be to stop drinking if you want your partner to stop drinking, or if you want your child to stop drinking. But I'm not an alcoholic. And then I say to them, well, you don't define yourself as an alcoholic, and look how hard it is for you to let go of the alcohol. And yet you cannot understand the person who you're defining as an alcoholic, who cannot let go of the alcohol. And often we know that in relationships, one person can do the alcohol, the other person does the marijuana. One person does the marijuana, the other person does the food. One person does the food, the other person does the porn. So what I say is that we cannot help the family has to help itself. And actually, if somebody in the family identifies with having addictions, how can the whole family go into recovery?
It definitely does affect the whole family. And back when I got clean and sober 19 years ago, there was just 12 steps. And as you mentioned before, as people can go look on, a bunch of different websites out there, like I said, you can look at Smart Recovery, Celebrate Recovery, right? I mean, all these different avenues to go down to find out what fits you. And there's parts for the family and parts for the individual, and great places to go. So if somebody comes and says, I want to go into treatment, what does that look like from your perspective, this word of treatment?
It's a good question. If somebody says they want to go into treatment, I would support that, of course, because people need to take total agency over their recovery. But I would explore what is it that you're looking for so that we can find the best treatment place for you. So rather than just saying yes, whatever, but what is it? What are your expectations? What is it that you're wanting? And also, I mean, when you say treatment, I see that as actually going into a rehab or going into some kind of institution. And the important thing is what is the recovery plan when you come out of treatment? This is the recovery capital that we're talking about, because we know that actually the high risk time is the first couple of months, 2 to 3 months, when somebody comes out of treatment in inverted commas. And we know many people die during that time. Many
Yeah.
people relapse because it's like, okay, so you've been in this treatment zone and all those distractions aren't there, but you're going right back into your old community where all the triggers are there. How are you going to keep sober and abstinent? And we know people think, oh, well, I'll just, get a packet, a wrap of fentanyl, or I get a wrap of smack, or whatever it is. And they think they can take the same amount as what they were able to take, and it's fatal. So coming back to you, when you say treatment, for me, it's like, what does that look like? You want to go into treatment, because treatment doesn't have to mean going into a rehab. You can have treatment still living at your home, at your house. So let's talk about that.
Yes, which is why you want to reach out to professionals in the field, right? To say, hey, what does this really look like? And there's a word you mentioned a minute ago, the community word is so important. And you've obviously created that through a lot of the work that you've done. I mean, you mentioned you had written a book. You've written several books, and you are a wordsmith and know how to encourage people along this pathway of going from addiction to living really a transformed life. And I'm just curious, this word transformed life, what do you think that means to you when you can go from the old person to living this new person that's living a life that really is free from the shackles of what you used to deal with and a lot of people are stuck in?
Sure. Before I answer that question, I just really want to remind the audience that there are so many different ways to recover. Like, some of us are recovery coaches. People don't even know that actually some of those famous people we look at travel with a recovery coach, you know?
Tell them about what that is, because we haven't talked much about that either, but that's a great thing to say. What the heck is a recovery coach?
Well, a recovery coach, somebody would come to me and they would talk about what their addictive behaviors are, and we would work out a plan of working together. And different recovery coaches work differently. How I would do an assessment. We would look at, how does the addiction manifest in your life? Look at the bigger picture, the family context. So it's quite a therapeutic. It's not therapy. We might actually be saying, actually, you need to go and do some therapy.
Hmm.
It might be, sometimes we'll be saying, okay, you can work with me, but let's have some agreements. Do you agree that perhaps going to a meeting doesn't have to be 12-step, but to a recovery meeting? So really, it's working out a personal plan for that person. I mean, the thing is, a recovery coach is something that you pay for, yeah, which is different.
Yeah.
So
Well, you're investing in yourself at that point. You're
exactly.
investing in a coach. Do you want to lose weight? You hire a fitness coach. You want to have good recovery? You hire a recovery coach like us. That's the beauty of it.
And hopefully recovery coaches will work like me. It's like, if I'm working with somebody, a recovery coach, and they're not really doing things that they've said or suggested, are they wasting their money? Okay. So it's not like, oh, you need to have abstinent like this, but I don't want you to waste your money, because sometimes we know people go to a recovery coach so they don't have to go to a 12-step program,
Mm.
so they don't have to go in rehab. They think, oh, well, they've got money. We have a recovery coach. I'm doing something about it. Yeah. So our job as a recovery coach is, it's not about, oh, we're being paid. How are we being of service to this person? Because ultimately we want this person to get recovery. It's a matter of life and death. And if we're not a good fit, we need to identify that.
Mm.
So coming back to, what does it look like as a transformed person? I love, some of people might be listening have done the forum, and I love the forum speak on this, because the forum is, what's the forum? It's this organization that, for people who want to wake up, it's for people who don't want to go to a Buddhist center or go on a retreat and sit cross-legged for 10 hours. Okay, it's for people who want that, short, sharp shock awakening. You sit in a chair for 3 days, for 10 hours, be comfortable, be booted and suited, and you get some kind of insight. But one of the things they talk about is this. They say, there are things we know, and there are things that we don't know. And when we don't know something, I say this, we go to Professor Google, or we go to the library, and then we find out what we know. And so we oscillate between knowing and don't knowing, knowing and don't knowing. And that's informational learning. And actually, often in recovery, it can be like that, informational learning. This is what you need to do. But actually, to really become transformed, one has to step into what you don't know that you don't know. Yeah, and it may be what you don't know that you don't know that you don't know. And one has to step into that, because often those of us who have had those addictions, we are holding on to stories. We know this is our story, and we have to surrender those stories and step into something that we don't know. And that could be really something that we don't know that we don't know. And that can be really tricky. But if you want to be transformed, one has to step into what you don't know that you don't know.
Totally. And it's a cool what you find out when you step into that. You're like, wow, I never knew that about myself. And there's so much each one of us has inside, whether you're the person suffering from an addiction or the family that's stuck in the cycle of trying to walk on eggshells around the person stuck with the addiction. There's so much more inside of us that needs to come out. And it's so beautiful when we find that. And hopefully we encourage people to step into what you're doing and how you're helping people understand just mindfulness and just the journey of living a transformed life. And whatever, if it's 8 steps or 12 steps or how many steps or whatever, just find something that's going to work for you to break the cycle. And that is what it is all about. So do you have any good kind of final words for our audience right now that's on the cusp of just like, I don't know if I want to have a different life or not. And they're in that moment right now watching this.
Well, if you don't know if you want a different life or not, then there's a part of you that does want a different life, because you wouldn't be entertaining that thought that actually there's something going on in your life. And what I would say is just don't give up. I mean, as I say, I was a chronic relapser, and just know that actually I would say 3 steps up the ladder and I dropped down 1. 3 steps up the ladder and I dropped down 1. So you was going up the ladder. And actually the thing is that if you pick up, well, what I want to say is, for me, there's a difference between a lapse and a relapse. And let's get that, because, what my partner says, well, somebody has just picked up. So if you pick up, you can put it back down again. But we know that to me, that lapse is you picked up, okay, you've used it. What are you going to do next? Are you going to say, oh, well, I picked up what, I may as well continue? And then you spiral into the relapse. But actually, you could pick up, you use, and you think, oh, God, okay. All right, I'm going to do something different in the next moment. So the other thing is that if you do relapse, don't give yourself a hard time. Actually, if you've relapsed, you're suffering. Yeah, you're suffering, you're hurting. That's why you've relapsed. You didn't know what else to do, which is why you turned to that. Just give yourself some love and compassion.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for inspiring us today and for all that you do, and just blessings on your continual journey of moving people's hearts towards living a different life. So thank you.
Thank you. I loved the interview. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.